So an interesting thing that we've gotten asked about, since we make the Hooter shooter, we get questions all the time of just random stuff like, hey, have you ever tried this? Have you ever tried that? And one of the things that kept coming up that we were getting asked a lot about was, is spine matching with us doing our nock turning to tune your arrows to all hit in the same hole? Is that essentially just spine matching? But it wasn't until I met a guy by the name of Rick McKinney. He was a US Olympic shooter. He also started a company called Carbon Tech, and they make a bunch of different arrows. But me and him were debating one day about whether or not spine matching was just doing the same thing as what the Hooter shooter was doing. And I was like, well, I don't really know. It doesn't seem like it, but we haven't really done a real fair, true, in-depth test. And so he asked me if I would be willing to do a test with him. And what he was going to do is he was going to send me 2 sets of arrows that he was going to mark very specifically with a numbering. I forget it was numbers or letters. He put something marking on them and said, make sure you don't rub those off. And I didn't. And they were just raw shafts, and I fletched them up. And I did my process where I get them all fletched up, I run them through the machine, I shoot them 1 arrow at a time, and in just kind of a 50-50 process, I just keep going through all the different nock orientations, and eventually I'd get these arrows all to tune into 1 hole, and these other 2 wouldn't tune in. And he sent me, I believe it was some hippos and some cheetahs. Those were the series of those arrows. Like one was like your classic field type arrow, and the other one's big fat line cutters. The hippos were like for shooting indoor spots. And after going through this process of tuning them all up, I found that with the hippos, I think I got all but 1 or 2 of them to hit in the same hole. And with the cheetahs, if I remember right, I got all but 1 to hit in the same hole. And proceeded to send them back to him. And what he had told me afterwards was that in some cases, some of those arrows were as much as 50-pound difference in spine from one to the other. You couldn't tell visually by looking at them, but if that's true, if the spines were off by that much, they shouldn't have hit in the same hole at all. And so what that proved to us and then we started going even farther, but it proved to us that the spine matching was not doing the same thing as doing the nock orientation. And so we started looking into it even more with our own stuff, where we were spine matching arrows ourselves and then going to the Hooter shooter with them. And what we found is it would, out of the gates, when you shoot a group of arrows through the shooting machine, you'll get about a golf ball, maybe a racquetball size group that all the arrows will hit in. And usually by going through the nock orientations, you're able to bring that down into a shaft and a half size hole. What was found by doing the spine matching before you went to the Hooter shooter was that you would get essentially where instead of it being a racquetball size, it was more like a golf ball to slightly inside of a golf ball size group through the Hooter shooter, but you still had to go through the process of tuning all your shafts and doing the nock turning to get them to all hit in the same shaft and a half size hole. So in turn, there was a measurable gain by spine matching versus actual tuning your nocks, but it was not as definitive as what the Hooter shooter was able to do, where you can take the arrows from a group like that down to the size of your finger. So I guess the answer is, no, spine matching does not necessarily guarantee that all your arrows are hitting the same spot. The only way you can guarantee that all your arrows are going to hit in the same spot is by indexing them through a Hooter shooter.